I'm going to start assembling the diaphragm. Now here's that plate. It had the corrosion on it and I've polished that both sides. This side here with the dimples on it is the shutter blade side. This side that's completely flat is the aperture blades side. So dimples down, flat side up. And I can start putting my blades in place. Now the pivots on these blades are not symmetrical. They're closer to the centre of the blade at one end and closer to the outside edge at the other. The pivot closer to the centre of the blade is the one to go into this plate, goes down into the plate. And I'm already seeing trouble getting these blades to run over each other smoothly. So I know I'm going to have trouble assembling this. This part's okay. The trouble will come when I want to swing the first few blades outwards so I can get the last few blades in position. And that could prove difficult because that narrowed area of the blades gives you an edge to catch things on. Be particularly careful to make sure that you do have your blades all laid out the same way so that as you pick them up you can put them in place easily. If you get some of the blades in one way round and some of them are the wrong way round, you will end up with a hole that's not round. If they are all incorrect, you'll either end up with an aperture setting which is not what you expected it to be, or you may find that the blades do not move through the entire range. You can see what I'm doing here. I'm swinging these blades out, the first ones, to allow access to get the next blade in position. There's always a danger that while you're manipulating them, you will disturb the blade from where its pin is fitted into the mechanism plate, and so it won't assemble correctly. And I can see I've got a problem here now because this blade is just sitting over we're just trying to catch underneath that blade. Last blade. This one's obviously moved. This business of blades that have had that big cutout or notch in the middle of them was something that wasn't continued with. So it probably means that the manufacturer found it too difficult to manufacture. Oh, see that blade's lifted out of its position there. This one here's wanting to these blades are not playing the game. This one here is lifted out of its socket I'm going to try and rescue the situation just because this is tedious. I don't want to have to do the job twice. So I'll fit this plate in place, see if I can get it to couple up to the rivets on this side. And then I'll see if I can wriggle everything into place after that. I've got one blade, the pin is not in position. See if I can swing it over. Right, all of the blades are sitting in position. Quite possibly more than one of those blades is not sitting, its rivet is not sitting in the plate correctly. I will find out. I'm going to put the cover on. Flip my jig over. Swap it to the other side. Oh yeah, a lot of those blades are out of position. I'll see if I can get my screws started and see if I can manipulate those blades into position. Here's my countersunk screw, that belongs there. I want these screws done up very lightly indeed because the blades are not sitting in position. And I'm going to have to try and manipulate them across. So I just want this plate held in position really. Alright, let's see what I've got. Oh, virtually nothing's in. It's 3. 4. 6. 7. 'll put a little bit of tension on this screw to help retain the pivots in place where they are lined up. I'll do the same here. Okay, I'll just have to check this closely, see if I can manipulate any more of these blades. that one. If these were just plain blades without notches, I wouldn't go through all this business. Not only would the process likely have gone smoother to start off with, but I wouldn't bother trying to rescue it. If it went bad, I would just simply start the process again. In this case, I think that I'll run into problems regardless of what I do. So I might just as well try and rescue what I've got. That's dropped in. I've got one. One is out. Might be able to hear that. That's a bellbird singing away outside the window. I can just see the rivet here, but I can't get onto it to move that blade back. Or that might do it. That's it. Let's do those screws up lightly. Right, it worked. That diaphragm's moving smoothly. That's all good. Just check that the 3 screws are tight. You bet you can hear that bellbird now. We're in the middle of the lockdown, of course, and there's a lot more birds around at the moment. They must have decided to come into town since there's not so many people and not so much traffic. I'll clean the settings lever and put that in place. Alright, well, I've lined up the holes through here so that I can get the screws through to hold my setting lever in place. I'm just going to give the setting lever a light wipe with molybdenum paste, very light, and put that in position. I'll line up my screws. Get the first one there. Run that in. Do that up very lightly. Then line up the second screw. Do the same. Now I can tighten the 2 screws up. and check the action. Well, that's smooth. There's some resistance there, that's to be expected, and that's a good thing. You don't want the settings to be displaced too easily, otherwise if you knock the setting it'll lose it. I can see that this setting lever here has got some rattle to it. The screw is loose there. I'll take the opportunity to do that up tight now. Otherwise that would have got lost in fairly short order, I would say. So there's our shutter case. The aperture's setting is back in. The diaphragm moves nice and smoothly. That's exactly as it should be. The plate, the retainer plate, I've polished that with Brasso. So there's quite a mottled finish to it now, but it's smooth. So there's no roughness there from corrosion. Now I need to turn my attention to the mechanism plate and strip that. So basically I need to take off the shutter blades. I'll tip them off, or they're a bit sticky. If they're sticky, that means they've got oil on them. They're a bit stained. There's not an awful lot to see there. There's a bit of staining, but they were certainly sticky. Didn't want to drop away from the mechanism plate when I turned it upside down. So the mechanism plate. Well, this is the actuating lever. I'll unhook the spring from that, and looking at this one, I can see that it has a washer underneath the screw at the top. That's just a shim washer. It's very, very thin, and it's not commonly found. Where it is found, it's just to stop rattle. It's just to stop some rattle here. It means that there's a slight discrepancy between the height of the post and the thickness of the lever. Very, very small numbers we're talking about here. On the underside, 4 screws hold the retainer to the mechanism plate. One of the screws will be short, no, one of the screws will be long rather. 3 of the screws will be short. These screws are locked in place with some product like Loctite. Possibly it was Loctite, or Loctite's granddad, who would know. But it's some product of a similar nature intended to stop the screws from rattling loose. They're all the 3 short screws. This is the long screw in this position. That screw was loose. It's important that these screws not be loose, because if they back out, inevitably they'll catch on a shutter blade and prevent the shutter from being able to continue through its normal cycle of opening and closing. That retainer comes off, and here is the blade actuating ring. This is the bit that swings backwards and forwards and swings the blades in and out around the pivots on the other plate. So that's a bit dirty looking. That certainly needs to be cleaned. The mechanism plate itself needs to be cleaned. Remove all this dirt around the outside here and dried grease. And the retard gear train is very sluggish in its action. That needs to be flushed with naphtha until that get rid of all the old oil and grease and dirt. Typically I only lubricate these with a bit of graphite powder once everything is clean and dry. This is just a bit sluggish. So I'll clean these components and then they can go back together. I can start putting the blades in place. First I'll check that I've unhooked the spring here, swing this into the outwards, which puts it in the blade's open position, and start putting the blades in place. First blade. These blades are all nicely cleaned and polished. Second blade. If you put your blades on back to front in the incorrect order, you'll end up with something clever like the blades being normally open and just closing briefly when you push your finger on the shutter button and then opening again. There we go, that's all our blades in position. Now I can put the shutter case on there. Line this up. Check that that's all aligned correctly. And then I have 3 screws that hold the shutter case together. You run them in lightly. Always be very cautious about doing this, because if one of the blades has become displaced while you are lifting the case over the top, it will inevitably end up trapped between the mechanism plate and the case and could potentially be damaged. So don't do the screws up tight until you are absolutely sure that everything is correctly in position, like that. Now I can tighten the 3 screws up, and that's our shutter blades all clean, free from oil contamination, all polished, running smoothly. Likewise our diaphragm also moves smoothly, and the blades are free from oil or any contamination there too. So now I can assemble the rest of the components to the mechanism plate, and typically I would start that with the flash contact. So the brass contact base goes in first, then this post. Now this has got a little plastic slug in it, a little plastic insulating slug, and I want to get that out so that I can put it in correctly later on. Otherwise I won't be able to get the wire tucked up correctly behind it. Almost inevitably the plastic slug is somewhat distorted by having a screw done up tight behind it, and so it doesn't want to come back out of the hole. This little plastic insulator is about 1 millimetre in length, less than 0.5 millimetre in diameter, very easily lost. If it is lost, the flash won't work, and it won't work because you will have the screw driving directly onto the wire instead of on the insulator. And what that does, of course, is it shorts the flash contact direct to the case. Alright, I've got that plastic slug out now, so that's ideal. I can get this contact into the shutter. Now quite commonly the square section of this contact is cracked and somewhat splayed and does not want to go down into the square hole in the mechanism plate. That is entirely normal, and you can only deal with that by being very patient and trying to tuck in that plastic section. It's not happening for me today. So I'm going to loosen up the 3 screws that hold the mechanism plate and the case together just slightly to allow me more wriggle room to get it down inside that square hole. These plastic contact posts here are very fragile. Of course, there are no spare parts. It's got to be reused. Here it's going in. Yeah, press that down into place. And that's fixed with a single screw, in which case, in this case it's brass. Sometimes it's blackened brass. This is just normal brass. Right, that's in. Let's do these 3 case screws back up again before I forget. That's good. Now I can carry on and put the other components in. Okay, some of these components, let's get these back in the shutter. So, the pallets for the flash sink goes there. The pallet wheel is here. Now the toe of that cam I like to lubricate lightly with a little bit of molybdenum paste. And molybdenum paste you only ever need a very small amount. You're just leaving a dirty mark on it, that's about all you have to do. That's moving smoothly. Now I want to put the flash contact in place. So first I need to put the high speed shutter spring in here. This is the extra spring that's engaged to drive the shutter when the 500th of a second speed is selected, and it just provides extra impetus to swing the shutter blades open and closed. So I'll just get my flash contact and its lever in place and make sure that the tip of it is clear of the cam when you're putting it in, so that it doesn't end up getting bent. And it should swing as the cam's revolved, and the cam should be able to revolve in both directions. Now this flash contact here is too low. It's actually scraping on the plate at that point. I'm just checking that the flash contact does make when I swing it in that direction. It does. Yeah, that's just a little bit out of shape. That's good. Next, the lever that goes on here and drives this, it needs to go in, and I've got to put that back together because it had popped apart. It's 2 pieces, and they're just held loosely together with a spring from underneath. So if I get those 2 components together, hold them together with a pair of tweezers carefully. There's a little tab of spring here, and I've got to pull it over and hook it behind that post. Like that. how those components are held together. And I can put them into the shutter. So I want to put a bit of molybdenum paste on that point. And fit this into place on its post in the shutter. Being careful not to disturb the piece I've just fitted. Right, now I've got to get it timed correctly with this cam. That's about one tooth out. Now the timing is quite critical. The timing should be such that when this lever is held back by this latch in that position, that the flash contact can swing across the flat low side of that lobe there. If we swing that back and swing this through, it should operate the flash lever smoothly. That's good, that's ideal. Now I've got to put its spring in place, and its spring stretches from this point to this tab over here. And it's a fairly strong spring, so it's fairly entertaining getting the thing in. We'll find some tweezers that are not too undernourished looking. See if I can stretch that in. If I can stretch that in a way that you can see it would be even better, but that's probably bloody impossible. Let's have a go. There it is. That's latched in. So this mechanism is in the cocked position now. If the shutter is fired, this tab effectively gets pulled over, releases this, which swings the arm across, which rotates the cam here, which then runs the flash and so forth. There's also another action that happens at that stage which releases the shutter. Right, well that part's good. I want to clean the components that go on top of that now and fit them.